So where you're standing was a Quaker meeting house. And behind us, of course, is the people that worship there were buried. Quakers didn't have headstones, so there's actually more people buried here than you can see. There's some darker stones that don't have markings, and then they progressed and finally have stones with the names and the dates of birth and death. Today, the handout you have matches up to the white flags, so you can follow along and read about the people buried here. There's a volunteer group that have done a wonderful job restoring cemeteries in Westport, and I like to point out that there was once an old pine tree there, huge, majestic, beautiful thing, but the stones had been vandalized or ruined from the tree, and the tree was taken down. The little stone right to the north of it with the white flag is 2-year-old Emily, who died choking on a bean. And that stone was found underground because it had been buried by the tree. And thanks to the volunteers of the Westport Cemetery Group, that stone is back upright, cleaned, and where it belongs to respect and remember her. A lot of the people buried here descend from the Howland family. They originally settled in Dartmouth on Russell's Mills Road upon a Gansett Meeting House, and over time spread out, and they had a meeting house here. Across the street, that blue house is the Zoeth Howland House, 1720, and his descendants married into the Giffords, and they were movers and shakers in Westport at the time, and that's why it's Gifford's Corner and Gifford's House, and they have some descendants buried here. There's also the Baker family has some descendants here. They had a house that's still there at the intersection of Old County and Pine Hill Road, and they had a tan vat behind Maple and Linden Grove cemeteries, and they were very strict Quakers. They had a marriage contract, and you definitely married within your religion. They have some descendants buried here. I'm related to everything I just told you. So there's a write-up right there on the cemetery on the sign. You'll see the white flags matching up to what you've got in your hands. Enjoy and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.
This cemetery is located on one of the very first farms in Westport. It was started by a Cornell family in 1669, so that's a long time ago. And it originally went from the river down there all the way through here and all the way over fields, over roads to Division Road.
Division Road.
Yeah, yeah, and it's been a farm all getting smaller and being cut up, but it's still a farm. It's a vineyard now, and before that, the Smith family had a dairy farm here for many years.
Yeah, I know.
Did you know them?
Yeah, I've been here for 81 years.
All right, then you remember when they left.
Yeah.
They had 3 sons, and thankfully they had sons who wanted to stay farmers. You know, most of the farmers in town, unfortunately, their kids wanted to do something else. So they realized that if they were going to have support that many next generation, they needed a bigger farm, and that's really why they sold this one. But so in this cemetery, there's a few stones here. This is all the White family, and this is like late 1800s. And then there's a space, we don't know what's under the ground there, and then there are more stones at the far end. And there's a number of number of names that are common. I don't know, maybe they'll be relatives of you. There's some Giffords here, Cornell, and there's one Soul down on the end. So
Is this a town cemetery? Or is this private?
I'm looking at my fellow. Is this a town cemetery or a private cemetery? It's a private one. So Wendy, you should be up here talking too. Well, the first question I got, I didn't know an answer to the question. It's a good one, though.
I'm just the backup.
So this was an infant daughter, and then later they had twins.
This is the Allen Wilcox Cemetery. It overlooks the East Branch of the Westport River. The Chase family, the Wilcox family, Job Allen, James Allen, Timothy Allen. Timothy Allen is a whaler. He's recorded in the Westport Vital Records as killed by a whale on August 2nd in 1852. These are the Quaker ones because they're unmarked. tranquil resting spot. Cows in the field. This is the cemetery behind Friends Meeting House. The Macomba family. There's nobody here to talk about them, so I'll just...
These are the graves of Paul Cuffey and his wife Alice. Paul was the son of a slave and of a Native American woman, and his wife Alice was a Native American woman. And they were married, well, about 1780, I think. He would have been 1783. That's the right year that they were married and started having children. They ended up having 7 children. And at that time, they were living in a Native American style house over near Destruction Brook, a house called a Wetu. And recently there's been a Wetu built over at the Round the Bend Farm in Dartmouth. That's like the one they lived in and fairly near where they lived. But then he eventually had built a boat yard over off Drift Road on the East Branch, and built up a shipyard, and he built 7 ships there and a house, a pretty elaborate house. It was one of the more valuable houses in the town at that time. And then he built ships and he sailed ships. He went whaling, he transported goods, and then he transported people to Africa to try to help the people of Africa develop businesses so that they could export goods instead of exporting slaves. And that was the purpose for him going to Africa, to try to destroy the slave trade by replacing it with the trade in goods. On his second trip, he contracted some illness in Africa and came back, and 9 months later he passed away. But in between his 2 trips to Africa, he built the Friends Meeting House here in 1813-14, oversaw the building of it and contributed half the cost of building it. So he was very important for this churchyard, the meeting yard, and the day after he died, he was buried here in the yard behind the meeting house that he had built. They had apparently a hurricane in 1815 that was very much like our hurricane of 1838, and it did serious damage to the Friends Meeting House over in Little Compton. And so Paul Cuffey put up the money and hired the man who he had working for him on building this meeting house here to go over and repair the meeting house in Little Compton. And he paid half the bill on that too. So he was taking care of the cause of the people in Little Compton, and I don't think that story's ever been fully appreciated by the people in Little Compton, what an important role he had there. He also had a very important role over at Russell's Mill, at Russell's Mills, where the Duvall store is now. His brother-in-law, Michael Weiner, and his sister, Mary Weiner, owned that property from 1776 to 1792. He ran a tannery there, Michael Weiner did, but Paul and Alice lived in the Wetu right near Russell's Mills, and the two of them, Paul and Michael, probably built their first ship in Russell's Mills, and sailed out of that area to go out into the ocean and to sea and so forth. And he probably also, during the war, he was delivering goods to the people of Nantucket, and he probably sailed out of Russell's Mills, taking those goods out to the people on Nantucket. So he's had important connections to Cuttyhunk, to Russell's Mills, the Slocum River, to the Westport River, and also to Little Compton. So let me stop at that point and answer if anybody has any questions.
Look at this one's got the silver thing on it. Let us not forget those who served Eastern.
This is different, that the stones are so large. This is on Adamsville Road, the Oscar Palmer Farm.
Charlotte White, as it says in the program, was born to the father was a freed slave of George White, who was in turn a son of William White from the Handy House. George White had inherited the homestead of his maternal grandfather, George Cadman, and it was a huge homestead that ran all the way over from the East Branch all the way to just a little ways west of here. And it's probably about 900 acres altogether. And when George White wrote his will, which I think was in 1764, he gave 10 acres of land to Zip White, who was Charlotte's father, and probably the one buried here in the middle, in between Charlotte and Elizabeth. George White also gave 200 pounds to another African slave, Violet White, who later married Piero Snell. Now these are unusual, just that it wasn't typical for slaves to receive bequest of either money or land under the will of their former masters. Some did receive their freedom more commonly. Charlotte's mother, Elizabeth, was maiden name Elizabeth David, probably the daughter, or I should say the granddaughter, of a man named Job David, who was one of the original settlers of the Pocasset reservation, Wampanoag Reservation, up at Watuppa in 1703. And her father was probably Solomon David, who is recorded several times in Tiverton records. Now the mother, there's a curious record relating to Charlotte's mother, Elizabeth. And back in 1750, she was a witness to an Indian marriage that took place down in Acoxet. And we know this because she gave a deposition in a case that involved the town of Dartmouth versus the town of Westport that was relating to what we would call welfare expenses relating to several descendants of that marriage. And the two Native Americans who were married, I believe it was Joseph, Jeffrey, and Amy Hinckley. And she gives the deposition for that. And the Jeffrey family has its own kind of connections. They had a daughter, Bethiah, who married Samuel Gray, who lived over at Russell's Mills and was one of the co-petitioners with Paul Cuffey and of the famous Paul Cuffey tax petition in 1785, where he protested that he was forced to pay taxes despite not having the right to vote. And the third co-petitioner was Samuel Gray, who lived over by Cuffey when he had the Indian-style house over at Russell's Mills. And their daughter, Bethiah Gray, married John Cuffey, who was the third co-petitioner, and Paul's brother as his first wife, and his second wife was Charlottie's sister and Elizabeth's daughter, Jane White. And later on in the next generation, Samuel Cuffey was the last person of color to own this area. He inherited this farm from Charlottie until he moved to New Bedford. I think it was about 1880 or so.
You know, somebody's front porch,
A doorstep.
you know, a doorstep. And we've had, it's amazing, there have been a number that have come to us in town. You know what? I have a gravestone in my house. I don't know where it came from or anything. And that's what happened. So what we did was created new concrete bases. They are put in with historic preservation mortar. Germany. It is a lime-based mortar. You can't use a Portland-type cement to put in a gravestone into a base because when it gets frost heaves, it's going to stay exactly in place. But marble is porous and it needs to be able to breathe a little bit. So if somebody does use Portland cement for that, eventually that's going to stay perfect, and then the stone itself is going to get a pressure crack right through it and then snap. So that's why we use the mortar. We had a piece of marble that was about 150 years old. One of our team members, Troy Rebello, cut it into that gravestone shape, and Albanese Monuments was kind enough to do the engraving for us to put exactly what was on that original stone. And this morning, the gentleman Otis Tripp, his 5-time great nephews came and they put that into place with us.
All right.
Which was really neat. At the time, these gravestones would have cost between $10 and maybe $17 or $18.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, at that time when Otis died, his all his personal possessions were valued at $32. So it's a lot of money for a gravestone. These were mostly cut in either New Bedford or Fall River. The one on the end has a New Bedford maker's mark on it. It says Taylor. Before that, these all folks were Quakers. And so they have fieldstone markers, which you've probably seen in other spots in the tour. The difference is that a lot of these they engraved.
Yep.
And like the ones right in front of you, we've cleaned these with the D2 biological solution, which is donated to us. It's what they use at Arlington, it's what they use at Vicksburg, Gettysburg to clean the stones. Gets rid of the lichens, the algae, and doesn't cause any problem. And once those are clean, you can read.
Yep.
You've got, like this one here, PT, so P Tripp, aged 59, DE for deceased.
Yep.
You've got JN, January 31, 1836. And that one's 1820, that one's 1838. The oldest one is 1789, which is at the end of that row there. And so this is all one family and their extended family. There are some that have an S, and the Tripp family, when they were here today and they had their genealogy book, they said that they married into a lot of Sissons, and they think some of those S's may be Sissons.
Yep.
So there are also others that we have records. We know they were buried here. We just don't know. Some of these aren't marked.
Yep.
You know, but it is a family burying ground. When they finished the work here, it was 1977, and this is the way that it has been since then.
Well, this is really incredible.
We're just, our team, we're volunteers. We work in all the cemeteries here in Westport. There are 106 cemeteries in the town of Westport. They're ranging in size from, if you went to Charlottie White, you saw it's just 3 graves,
Right.
versus Beech Grove, which is, thousands.
So the graves were moved from where?
So each grave that you're seeing, if you were looking at a GPS location, this grave is exactly where it
So
was.
I see what you're saying.
20 feet higher.
Okay, so it's the same location, it's just lower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what they had to do. And it's easy to imagine, well, maybe not, but at the point where it was so high and fields had been cleared, if you were standing here in the cemetery at that time, you could see directly into the river.
Wow.
It must have been an amazing view. You don't have that anymore.
No.
But it's very, very sandy here. There's still a lot of gravel, a lot of poison ivy. We've cut back some of that stuff. But yeah, the husband is on that far end, Nathaniel. The wife, Sophia, is on this end, which is a little unusual. And in the middle, you have their nephew, Potter Tripp. Nathaniel and his brother married 2 sisters. And that was their nephew, then their son, one of their daughters, and the daughter's wife, who was from Tiverton. She would not have been a practicing Quaker at that time, because when they did eventually allow the Society of Friends, about 1850 or so, or even a little earlier, said, you know what, it's okay to mark the graves of your dead, but they should not be more than 13 inches high, and they should not have any sayings, any floral cuts, anything. And to see, you know, that an engraving on the bottom, or that one with the urn with the wishing well, which there's one on the other end like that as well, those would not have been something that they would do.
No ornamentation, like
No ornamentation on if you were a strict follower of the Society of Friends as we understand it. This one there, that one that says ET 1819, we actually found that stone in the woods. Wow. I don't know whether somebody had. We have no idea why it was there, but so we've been doing. Once this piece was finished this morning, we've been leveling and raising up. A lot of these, you can see the dirt marks. So you can see them dirt.
Yep.
So what had happened was, over time, because everything sinks, and a lot of times, some of those they were right up to the letters, and when they get that low, you're in danger of getting run over by a lawnmower. And as we've said, you know, I probably said it to you. I've said it all day that lawnmowers can be the worst offenders when it comes to damage in the cemeteries. And so that's what we try to avoid by, you know, putting them back up the way they were supposed to be and leveling them, you know.
Now you said this was a big hill? Oh,
This whole area was 20 feet higher than it is right now. Oh, you're
Wow.
welcome. It was 20 feet higher.
so when was that? 20. So this has
So-
been cleared?
It was in 1977, they lowered it because of the erosion. Everything was falling down, and the area was being developed. And because the cemetery was eroding, they dug the gravel all the way around and left just the cemetery way up on the hill, and everything was kind of falling down. So they had to, you know, lower everything to this level.
All the bodies and everything were all...
Everything was excavated, yes. They had a funeral director here, they had the town of Selectmen representative here, and people who had done this work. They mapped out where every set of remains was. They all went in individual casket type boxes, and they were all placed in the original spots that they were originally buried in, just 20 feet lower.
Wow, that's amazing. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, and it was quite a project, quite an undertaking. You know, the fact that both sides, today when you think about two sides coming to an agreement and getting something done, it doesn't happen that way, but both sides, the landowners and the families, agreed, you know, on what was, it might not have been what everybody wanted, but it was the compromise they made. And so here we are now, almost 50 years later, and the site is still here, and it's getting some TLC, which is what it really, you know, it's needed, and any cemetery needs that. If you don't have upkeep, it's like your house, you know, if you let things go for 10 years, you could think of 10 things. So it's been a long time since anything was done here, but it's really starting to look the way it was meant to be.
So those are more kind of rough hewn than that. Those going to be cleaned and have names show up on them and everything?
Well, a lot of those, if you look, they do have initials, and they have dates and information carved on them, but that's how they were made. Those were homemade. Basically, they were cut by family. Some of them even have backwards S's, and the one is a backwards D. And they were done with just a hammer and chisel onto fieldstone. At the time, these gravestones here would have cost them more money than most families. If you were just an average farming family at that time, you couldn't afford that. And so this was the alternative. Or if you were belonged to the Quakers, the Society of Friends, that was what they subscribed to.
And they certainly had an abundance of fieldstone.
They sure did. And the number that we found buried like excavate it. I think every spare rock they took, they just threw in here. We've been rolling out these large rocks all day, but yeah, we've enjoyed this. This is we have 100 some odd cemeteries in Westport. Our team has repaired almost 800 stones in the past 3 years. So it's fun, we finish one, we enjoy the fruits of our work, and then we move on to the next one. We were already like, okay, where we're going to be next week, you just move on.
Boy, and that's still all.
That's a replacement stone.
Oh,
That's the one that we had replaced. That was the one that was either stolen, broken, or lost. And so that is the stone that Albany's engraved for us. We cut the stone ourselves from a piece of marble that was almost 200 years old. And our teammate Troy Rebello, he's working over there, he cut that stone. They did the engraving, and it was Otis Tripp's five-time great nephews that placed the stone back with us today.
Oh, that's what I came in on when you were telling him.
Yeah, we did. They did that, and then we brought the flowers in. They planted the geraniums there, and so that's like it doesn't happen that often that we have direct family members who come in and do that. So that was enjoyable for us. That really was. So good day. We had a great turnout. We were amazed. We must have seen close to 100 people, and didn't realize how popular this would be. So hopefully it's something we'll do again.
Well, I did all the whole tour.
You did?
You got time for the last stone?
The last one.
It's a little crooked.
Yeah, it is.
Well, you girls want to do it? You can film.
Yeah.
Don's got it. There you go.
Right there.
You got these two doing it?
Well, behind that. Yep, a lot.
Westport Access TV. Uh-oh.
Yep.
We're in trouble now.
You want some fresh dirt so we don't have to bring it home?
Right here, I mean, this where the other hole was.
I'll turn around like a pit worker or something.
Yeah, the more dirt we leave here, the less we bring home.
Oh, you got it in the woods. You noticed the wheelbarrow disappeared, right?
Oh yeah, did you take it?
Yeah, I had my trailer yesterday with a lawnmower.
Oh.
Post a picture,
How much does that weigh?
Troy?
Daddy.
How much does that weigh?
I don't know, maybe 60 pounds.
That's not that bad. That one's like
It's a light one, 50, 60 pounds.
How about this one?
This one here is probably about 100, 150.
Yeah, that's a good size one.
I was the only one that could move that one.
Do you need more?
Yeah.
Do you want more right here, or are you good?
Yeah, right.
No, when they start getting 175, 200, we got a tripod.
We have a tripod that we use to lift.
Yeah, I saw you at the one on Reed Road when you were cleaning them
Oh yeah, yeah.
a couple years ago. Yeah.
That's right, that's who you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were up there when Jonathan Fell came up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. I do remember that.
Was that Susan Helen up there?
Where's the rake? Don's got the rake. Yep.
Now somebody's got to water those flowers.
They were watered once.
Oh, gee.
We'll have to come back next week and give them a tune-up.
Stop by with a couple bottles of water.
Let's take those pipes out. I mean the wood out of the ground too.
Nice. Much better.
Definitely.
Hey, you want to do that last row, or is that going to be another day?
What last one?
The last row. You're going to be really soon. You're going to be today.
I was going to say, there could be another day.
That enough?
I know.
Do you want us to lift those?
Oh, different.
Rocks, rocks, and more rocks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is full of
Just
rocks.
get them over with so we don't have to come back here again.
And they keep floating to the top, too. The rocks float.
Just don't want the lawnmower to get them.
So that's all you got to do, huh? The last
it.
row? You raised them up?
Yeah, because they were tilted over and sunk in, some of them, and the big ones were those this morning, getting all those up.
Yeah, you can see the line where they...
Yeah. They were all buried. Long day.
Back-breaking work.